Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RadeonGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing, as well as analysing, tech news which, as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. Hopefully, you're having an amazing day. We have lots of stuff to get through in this video. I want to start things out with several things from AMD, and the Mi100 is our first subject. The Radeon Instinct Mi100 has been known about for some time now, and it's also perhaps better known as Arcturus. March last year, I actually mentioned in an exclusive that I'd been told that AMD were essentially splitting up their GPUs, focusing on gaming with one set of architecture, and for the other they were focusing on compute, high performance computing, and so on and so on. And then we started to finally hear whispers of Mi100/Arcturus. And AMD's official name externally is the CDNA architecture. It will launch this year on the 7nm process, and you can see AMD's own roadmap here. It will sport features such as the second generation AMD Infinity architecture, and naturally has been optimized for machine learning and high performance computing. And then we will see the successor maybe the year after, or perhaps even 2022. Obviously, roadmaps are slightly vague, which will sport an advanced node. We can probably predict it's going to be 5nm, but obviously take that with a grain of salt until it's officially confirmed. But CDNA2 will obviously have improved performance, plus will sport features like the third generation of AMD's Infinity architecture, and will be extending itself to exascale as well. And there's quite a lot of excitement around this, because really and truly it will put AMD finally in a competitive situation against Nvidia. And Mark Papermaster has actually confirmed that, well, yeah, it is coming this year. Hi Milash, he begins. Like our multi-generation commitment to the Zen roadmap in x86 CPU, we've done the same with our DNA architecture for GPU, RDNA for gaming and visualization, CDNA for compute and AI. The RDNA driving gain is AMD sharing graphics and deployed in upcoming Sony and Microsoft next-gen consoles, and for CDNA, you will see the Mi100 discrete GPU both second half of 2020. The ROCm software stack creates an alternative for GPU compute with easy portability and enabling competition. Now, it's worth noting that Hassan over at WCCF Tech actually spotted this during a Dell HPC conference, but here's the thing. We don't officially know, of course, the specifications of the card yet, but the rumor is that this thing is absolutely monstrous. We've seen Rogaine as well as Komachi on Twitter discover various test boards, and, well, yeah, quite ridiculous. We've seen up to 32 gigabytes of HBM2, which isn't that profound. We've seen other cards which sport similar numbers, but while the clock frequency of the memory is 1200 megahertz, the thing that really sets it apart is the number of GPU cores. We're actually seeing 8,192, meaning that this sucker has 128 compute units. And indeed, I also put out a video to say that from everything I'd been hearing, the Mi100 was actually pushing reticle limits. In other words, it was a chunky boy. It was pretty damn massive. And there are reports that for FP32 compute, it's hitting 25 T-flops. And just to put that into context, it's why I believe that AMD could quite happily produce an RDNA 2 card which has 80 compute units, which is, by the way, the rumor for the RX 6000. It tops out around 80 compute units. But the clock frequency, of course, for these products is yet to be set in stone. Also, given we're talking about graphics card stuff, It's also worth noting that Komachi on Twitter has actually found a couple of interesting things regarding Navi 21. And this does appear to be audio stack for HDMI, so it's not a massive amount of information that we can achieve here, but what we can learn at least is that Navi 21 is getting closer and closer to launch. As I said, it's a small update, but I did want to throw it in. I'd also like to touch on some benchmarks which have emerged for the Radeon Pro 5600M, which sports 8 GB of high bandwidth memory too. This has actually just been recently introduced to the world and has 40 compute units and, as I mentioned, HBM2. It's certainly not exactly what you could consider an amazing GPU in terms of the theoretical capabilities of what you could get with a card which is, let's say, designed for discrete GPUs for the desktop. But even so, this thing is incredibly impressive, despite the fact it only has 40 compute units running at just over a gigahertz in clock frequency. It's actually really fast. It's pretty damn close to what a Vega 48 is capable of. And indeed, if you take a gander at other metal benchmarks of results around the same performance, you can see that it's a very impressive card indeed for compute-based scenarios. And once again, this, of course, is RDNA based. It'll be very interesting to see what is possible for AMD to achieve in the future. And full credit to the source of these benchmarks, which is Max Tech. I will, of course, link the video source in the description. Either way, I'm going to be very curious to see what actually ends up with the professional segment from AMD. It's worth noting that the 5600M hits just 1035 megahertz, and this is with a 50-watt TGP. So that's pretty damn small in terms of a power budget. It'll be absolutely fascinating to imagine what it would be capable of if that budget was just a little bit higher, let's say 70 watts. Yeah, I'm going to be very curious to see how the next couple of months turn out, especially with AMD products coming thick and fast recently. And it's definitely a very good time for the market. And, well, there is something very cool from Intel as well. If you've been following the channel for a while, you know that I'm actually pretty excited that Intel are getting into graphics, much like I'm very happy that AMD have been putting out competitive CPUs, because if there's one thing I'm a fan of, that is competition in the market. More competition equals good for us as end users. And to my knowledge, Intel will not be competing in the gaming segment for discrete graphics first. They are targeting high-performance computing, that is data center, and also laptops, small form factor devices. And to that end, Ryan Shrout, who is of course an Intel employee, just bear that in mind, has demoed a 45-ish second long video where we see a prototype Tiger Lake system, and this does sport XE graphics running Battlefield. Now, it's important to note several things before we proceed. One, don't know how close to finished the hardware is. Two, Ryan himself confirms that the drivers and software stack are still, well, quite early. The next thing is we don't know the full configuration of the system that's being tested here. So there, once again, to our knowledge, are several different designs for Tiger Lake, which is, of course, a 10nm CPU. So the Tiger Lake U series has just 4 CPU cores. Obviously, that means 8 threads. And a total of 15 watts. But there's also several different iGPU configurations for this, and to what we understand, it maxes out at 96 execution units. So it's possible that this is the fully fledged design, 96 execution units, but we don't know what configuration the CPU is in terms of clock frequencies or whatever. And even if it is 96 execution units that's seen here, and it could certainly be less, We don't know what clock frequency it's hitting, and because furthermore the software itself is still early, well, yeah. But getting out of the asterisks of we don't know the setup, what I think is quite impressive is the raw performance here, because Battlefield hitting 30-ish frames per second on high is not an easy feat. Now, yes, if you were to compare this to a discrete GPU, such as a 1650 or something like that, of course, it's not that impressive. But just in terms of what this architecture can bring to the table, I think it's pretty damn amazing. And to me, this is going to be very awesome for future GPUs, or rather APUs, from Intel and AMD over the next couple of years. I think that there are still going to be some constraints over the next few years, primarily bandwidth. But I think as we start to shift towards faster memory, DDR5 for example, or perhaps larger caches on the die or whatever else, I think there's going to be some really cool stuff which starts to come to the forefront. And obviously, this is not a device that high-end gamers are probably going to be satisfied with. In the end of the day, yes, if you want to play like super high frame rates, high resolutions, max texture quality, and whatever, this is not going to necessarily be for you. But this is going to be a pretty damn awesome device in terms of the weight power consumption, most likely. And as I mentioned earlier, AMD have also been putting out some fantastic APUs recently. Renoir has been extremely competitive. So to me, this is only going to be an amazing thing for the next several years. And if anything, both AMD and Intel putting out this level of hardware performance is going to be very interesting for NVIDIA, because obviously, traditionally, it doesn't matter what the CPU is, whether it's AMD or NVIDIA, AMD or Intel. That was a very different world I was conjuring there. NVIDIA in the x86 game. But yeah, being serious for a moment, if you had this situation where AMD or Intel would provide the CPU, and then of course you would have the discrete GPU, which was capable of running the games, or perhaps accelerating a workload, like I don't know, like Adobe Photoshop, or maybe 3ds Max, or whatever. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how this starts to evolve over the next few years. And, well, might as well continue the freight train, and that's moving on to Xbox. The Verge's Tom Warren has actually revealed that the hardware transitions for xCloud are now starting, or at least they will be starting, for Microsoft to offer game streaming on Xbox Series X hardware. So in other words, we will start to see the streaming service being powered by Xbox Series X. And initially, it will be only on Xbox One S hardware, but we will start to see it transition, according to Tom Warren. His exact quote was, Microsoft is planning to upgrade Project xCloud servers to Xbox One X hardware in 2021. At launch, Project xCloud will be powered primarily by existing Xbox One S blades. He also confirmed that Microsoft is planning to roll out this service as part of Xbox Game Pass later this year. And I think this is a hint, to be honest, of what Microsoft's plans are for the next generation. Yesterday, I went rather extensively into the pricing of the consoles and the fact that Microsoft were going to be performing a number of mic drops. Those were the leakers' words, not mine, on Amazon, Sony, Nintendo, and basically everyone. And I think Microsoft are here to set messages. And one of the ways they can do that, especially against Amazon and Google, is of course to have a very viable solution for game streaming. And this isn't to say that I believe they're going to solve every single problem which is inherent to game streaming. There are limits that we currently have with technology. Microsoft cannot conjure, for example, everyone having 1 gigabyte per second connections to their servers. It just doesn't work like that, of course, in reality. But I do think that Microsoft are going to offer a very compelling service to basically every gamer. And once again, going back to the whole laptop solution, it could be very interesting to see how this could even work with cloud gaming. I'm going to be very interested to see what Microsoft do announce over the next couple of months, because I have been hearing a lot that Microsoft are not playing around when it comes to exclusives on their ecosystem. And that's the key. They are not focused necessarily on getting you to buy their hardware. Of course, they want you to buy their hardware, but they're also not going to cry themselves to sleep at night if you just end up getting xCloud on, let's say for the sake of argument, your laptop or whatever else. It's really not going to bother them. They will use all of their money in their bank account to comfort themselves. And I think even Sony, that's why we're starting to see some of the announcements we are from Sony in terms of bringing a lot of their titles to PC. Of course, we've seen Horizon Zero Dawn is going to be coming to PC. And I think this is possibly a strategy that Sony will continue to employ. Not for all games by any stretch of the imagination, but certain select titles. I honestly would not be surprised if Sony uses that to bring people in. And there were also reports that we will see Sony not just rely on the PlayStation ecosystem. At the end of the day, it's kind of getting to that point in gaming where you need your finger in as many pies as possible, especially given consoles eventually may start to become a thing of the past. We don't really know where gaming is going to end up in 2, 3, 4, certainly 5 or 6 years. Will the PlayStation 5, will the Xbox Series X be the final consoles? Well, we've been hearing that a lot. Let's just be totally blunt with one another. We heard the PS3 may be the final consoles. We heard the PS4 may be the final consoles. And analysts are very happy to keep pushing that. I personally think that for some time now, we're still going to get a dedicated box which sits in your living room. Hell, Phil Spencer himself said that he even likes a dedicated box which sits in the living room. And maybe it's just me, maybe it is, but I've got to admit, while I do quite like the theory behind cloud gaming, and I do think that it's definitely cool from accessibility standpoint, I really like just having a high-end system in my home. Knowing I've got a high-end PC or a console or whatever, it feels a little bit less with the cloud gaming solutions. Let me know what your thoughts are on this one. I'm kind of curious. Maybe I'm just like the odd person out here, but then again, I'm also kind of weird because I'm one of those people who just refuses to buy digital unless it's on PC. With PC, you basically have no choice, but with console, you still want the bloody physical disc. I know, certain services and whatever are going to be useless, and you still need to patch the game, but yeah, I'm not quite ready to get rid of my spinning discs of joy. Anyway, with all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. The normal stuff if you did, like, share, comment, and of course subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.